Okay, let's start off by giving some learning objectives. First, what we want to do is contextualize Mexico's drug violence. Second, we hope to show that this is not just a Mexico problem. The violence is not just a Mexico problem, or the drug trade is a global issue. It's a global problem. And then I want to give you a kind of course breakdown of how the semester will be divided into four main themes. So 3,951. What does this number represent? Well, it actually represents the number of murders in Ciudad Juarez in 2010. From 2001 to 2012, can you guess how many US troops were killed in the war in Afghanistan? Well, that number is actually 2,099. The number of US and British troops killed in Afghanistan, on the other hand, along with all other foreign allied forces, is only slightly higher at 3,153. So think about this. In 1 year, in one city in Mexico, a city with the population of between 1.2 and 1.3 million people, more people were murdered in Ciudad Juarez than the entire Allied combined forces in a major foreign war, a war over the period of a decade. Originally, that number, 3,951, in 2010 was reported as 3,111, which averaged out to be 8 murders a day. But then this number was later corrected by official government reports. And so 3,951, that's almost 11 murders a day. But in 2010, that was not the only bloody year in recent past in Ciudad Juarez. In 2007, there were 307 murders. 2008, 1,623. 2009, 2,754. And 2010, 3,951. You don't have to remember those numbers, but I want to give it to you for some effect. Right? Since Mexico's former president, Felipe Calderon, declared war on the drug cartels in December of 2006 to July 2012, approximately 10,000 people were murdered in Ciudad Juarez. In Juarez, from 2006 to 2012, there was murder unlike anywhere else. And so, what is happening in Ciudad Juarez? What happened? But what about Mexico as a whole? Statistics are really hard to come by. Official government statistics for deaths related to the drug war are notoriously underreported. Right? As of January 2012, the Mexican Attorney General's office reported that there were 47,000 deaths from 2006 to 2011. But the probably more accurate count from between that time in all of Mexico was like 60,000 murders nationwide. So think about this also in comparison to another US war, the Vietnam War. Around 58,000 US troops died in the Vietnam War. And so when we think about Mexico, when we think about Ciudad Juarez, why is no one really talking about it? This is one of the most underreported human rights crises in the world today. And so we intend to talk about that in this class. But despite the carnage, US trade with Mexico has been business as usual. Mexico is the number 3 economic trading partner with the USA, and Mexico is actually the number 1 trading business partner with the state of Texas. So despite the drug violence, trade increased in 2010, the year with the biggest murder count. It was up 7% since 2008 and up 28% since 2009. Right? So as murders were going up, trade and business was booming as well. All kinds of business, both legal and illegal. And so the first thing I want you to understand is that the trade in drugs is a business, right? And because of its illegality, it operates by perhaps different rules, but the basic laws of supply and demand are the same as all other products. Consider also that El Paso, just across the border from Ciudad Juarez, so close you can virtually see most of Juarez from El Paso, El Paso was declared the safest city with a population of over 500,000 in 2010, 2011. So while Ciudad Juarez was the murder capital of the world across the river, it was across the river from the safest city in America. What is going on in Mexico? What is going on in America? Whatever you think about this subject, whatever preconceptions you might have about the drug trade, drugs themselves, or even about Mexico, there is something truly peculiar about this situation. A situation where one city in Mexico on the border is the murder capital of the world, and on the other side of the border, the other city is considered the safest in America, especially considering that what makes the one city so unsafe is mostly due to the product that is being shipped and sold through the safest city. Americans are the world's biggest drug consumers. In 2009, stats reported that approximately 46% of Americans 12 and older had consumed drugs. And we're talking about pot, cocaine, heroin, and meth. Drugs go north through the poorest borders to satisfy a demand. We have a basic economic principle at work here: supply and demand. When people want a product, suppliers will find a way to get it to them. Making a product illegal, prohibited, only makes that more lucrative for the sellers, those that take the risk in selling. Consider, for instance, a kilo of cocaine. It starts off as coca leaf, right? Regular green leaves that indigenous people in Bolivia and Peru use as a slightly strong tea. It's not that narcotic. It won't get you high if you drink coca leaf tea. But coca leaf growers in Bolivia and Peru can earn $700 a year on an acre of harvest, right? 250 kilos of coca leaf make 1 kilo of base cocaine. And a kilo of cocaine, once it goes from the leaf form in Bolivia and Peru to the more pungent, uh, purified cocaine substance, once it goes into Colombia, it's worth $1,200. By the time it reaches Panama, it's worth $2,300. By the time it gets to Mexico, it's worth $8,300. Nearing the border, Ciudad Juarez, it's going to be $15,000 to $25,000. And then by the time it makes it to the streets of New York City, $80,000. That is an amazing markup, and it has to do with the difficulty in smuggling it through a network of law enforcement and criminal gangs. In fact, the illicit nature of the trade in drugs is what forces it outside the boundaries of traditional business practices. So, where Wall Street companies and big chain suppliers might be able to buy out their rivals, drug chains do similarly, except they can literally kill off their competition. So, in summary, there has been an extraordinary upswing in murders since around the year 2000 in Mexico due to the drug trade. This trade exists because US consumers are using it. Billions of dollars are made in this business. US banks have been involved in laundering the money. It's not just a Mexico problem, it's an American one too. But it's not just an American one, it's also a Central American one. As more and more drugs are being shipped through the region, it's also a South American problem. Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Bolivia, all are involved, whether in production, consumption, or transit. But it's also a European one, right? As the United Nations is one of the principal organizations that has produced major policy prohibiting certain drugs. It's a world problem. There's flights from Argentina to Spain which have been intercepted. So, in this course, our intent is to look at a transnational, meaning outside and beyond just the nation state. It's a transnational problem of the modern drug trade. So, now I want to just say a few things about how the course is going to be broken down. It's divided into 4 sections. First, we're going to look at Mexico's current drug war. The first section is really a thumbnail sketch of the history of Mexico. We'll be developing a specific historical context for the development of Mexico's drug trade. We'll look at the upswing in violence and how this was not a predetermined event. The violence has skyrocketed in the last 10 years to, excuse me, 20 years. We'll be reading Yon Grillo's book, El Narco. We'll be following his outline, but we'll be using it as a point of departure for a diverse array of subjects. The development of the trade, the cultural and political ramifications, as well as looking at Mexico's institutions. We'll examine things like corruption, democratization, and globalization. Second, we're going to pan out from Mexico, and we're going to be looking at not just the Mexican situation, because it's not just sufficient to only look at Mexico. This is a transnational trade. We need to look at a broader context. Why are certain substances illegal in the first place? Where did the current drug policies come from? This will take us all the way back to the 16th century and to Europe. We'll look at how the British Empire was basically the world's first drug cartel. Third, we want to look at an anatomy of violence. We're going to go back to Mexico, but we'll be reading an autobiography of a Mexican hitman, in Spanish, El Sicario. This will allow us to do an ethnography on the drug trade. We'll look at the factors that lead individuals into the narcotics industry and the violence associated with it. Lastly, we'll look at addiction. And if Americans are the biggest consumers of drugs, we want to look at the American situation. After these historical contexts have been analyzed, both a Mexican context and a world historical context, we'll take this larger step back. We'll look at drugs as commodities and as cultural creations. What lessons can we learn from other national drug strategies? In fact, that might be a bit of a surprise to some, that there are indeed different strategies at dealing with narcotics than simply the war on drugs model that has become the norm in the United States for the past 50 to 100 years. What lessons can we learn from Europe and elsewhere in the Americas? We'll discuss what the future of the drug trade might produce. Also, we'll seek to come up with some strategies for ways forward. And now, with all that said, we're talking about a subject that is the drug trade. We want to set some ground rules. The first disclaimer is that we are dealing with controversial issues. We're dealing with drugs. Lots of people have a variety of stances on drugs. Should they be legalized? Are they bad? Are they good? We want to be sensitive to a variety of viewpoints here and not let our biases, whatever they might be, get in the way of the facts as we try to view them. We want to keep an open mind. Second, we are dealing with violence, in many cases, gruesome violence. We will mention this violence, but we never want to descend into sort of rubbernecking. What do I mean by this term? That's sort of straining your neck to look at roadside accidents, the love of tragedy or the delight in violence. I want everyone to be sensitive about death. I don't want us to show graphic photos. We don't want to become immune to the real human lives that are lost. I ask that when you present research, for instance, at the end of the term, that you do not show graphic images or blood and gore. However, at appropriate times, we might talk about the rationale of violence and the power plays involved in what are oftentimes truly gruesome criminal activities. And so, with that, that's sort of a basic overview and an introduction into the ways in which we want to study the modern history of drugs this term.